My colleague, Senator Johnston, and I are here today to outline the way forward for the air warfare destroyer program. When we came into government, we were both confronted with advice that very important program for our national security and for the shipbuilding industry here in Australia was in serious trouble. We were confronted with advice about serious delays in the delivery of the program. We were confronted with advice about serious cost overruns. You'd be aware that earlier this year the Auditor General released a report where he pointed to cost overruns of about $300 million at that point in time. The position that we inherited was a deteriorating position, and right now we are being advised that the overall project is about 21 months behind. So what we did, the Defence Minister and I, before Christmas last year, was to commission an independent review to give us an independent perspective on all of the issues with the program, and also make some recommendations on the best way forward. That review, of course, was led by the former US Secretary of Navy, Professor Winter, yes, and they have provided a report to government both on the issues with the program that we've inherited, and also outlining a series of proposed solutions. Now, the main problems with the project as we have inherited is that there were problems with the initial program plan, there were problems with inadequate government oversight, there were problems with the alliance structure, which seemed incapable to manage issues even as they arose, and there were also problems with the performance and capabilities of ASC and major subcontractors. Now, as the government, we're totally committed to ensure that this program is put back on track, that it is delivered in the most cost-effective way possible, which is why we have decided to adopt the recommendations made by the Winter Review in principle, while we now proceed with working through some of that detail. In summary, the reform strategy that Professor Winter has recommended to the government will seek to improve shipbuilding productivity at the air warfare destroyer shipbuilder ASC and its subcontractors. It will include the urgent insertion of an experienced shipbuilding management team into ASC, and after we have been able to augment shipbuilding capacity, we will seek to pursue the reallocation of blocks between shipyards to ensure that the program is sustainable and that productivity levels are maximised. We will, in progressing this further, seek the advice from commercial and legal advisors. There are obviously some serious complexities involved in giving effect to the recommendations made by the Winter Review, which is why we will immediately engage relevant commercial and legal advisors to assist us through that process, and we will have some further announcements to make in terms of the practical implementation of this reform strategy in July this year. I hand over to my friend and colleague, Senator Johnston.
Well, thank you, Senator Cormann, and can I thank you for the support that you've given the project and the Defence Material Organisation going forward. When we looked at the numbers surrounding the performance of this program just before Christmas last year, there was cause for some concern. We balanced and baselined production at about 80 man-hours per gross tonne for these three ships. Currently, it's running at 150 man-hours per tonne. There was a rebaselining in May of 2011 and a further change to the schedule again in September 2012. It's clear that none of that work, that remediation work, was adequately surveilled, and quite frankly, both Defence and the Finance Department have come to the conclusion that action needs to be taken, simply from the perspective that I, for one, and I know I speak on behalf of Senator Cormann, will not have a project running over time, running over cost at such a particular stage of the program. Now, we are going to take some remedial action. We are sending today a very clear message to industry that we must do better. We must do better. This is the third remediation cycle that has been put before this program. I can assure everybody that myself and Senator Cormann will be surveilling this remedial action on a very, very regular basis. We are not about to tolerate another defence blowout in this subject. Now, that's what's happened here, dating back to about September, October. We then put the report in place with the assistance of the Finance Department, working together to come up with this solution. Now, we're announcing the solution and we're going to put it into play. And that's really all I want to say, other than to underline the fact that we're going to fix this up.
Happy to take some questions.
Minister Johnston, if I could ask you a question, what remedial action will you take over the maintenance of the Prime Minister's plans?
We have a set of recommendations from Don Winter, who is a former...
Sorry, there was a question about the Prime Minister's plane, I think.
Oh, I'm sorry.
What remedial action will you undertake to
me.
ensure the reliable performance of the Prime Minister's plans?
We came into power and found that in the dying days of the last government, they had renewed the contract for the current special purpose fleet. Now, I was very unhappy about that. These aircraft are old, require increased maintenance. A bathtub curve does apply to them. We wanted to change them out. I've been left with significant costs to do that. There's a program come forward that we're working on now. I am extraordinarily concerned that that aircraft was not initially serviceable, but the second aircraft was and had to be brought out. Look, this is again another example of the legacy of the previous government. Those aircraft should have been changed. We would have done it in a bipartisan way, but no, they chose to say, well, I don't think we're going to win the next election. Let's give a hospital handball to the next government, and that's exactly what happened.
To follow a semblance of order, are there any questions? Sorry, are there any questions about the Air Warfare Destroyer program? And then we might follow up with some other issues after that. Yes. Sorry.
Sorry, on the air warfare program, there have been 3 mediations, as you said before. What's to say this one is going to be any different? What are you doing differently to previous?
So what we have done, of course, here is that we have commissioned a very significant independent review by Professor Winter, who is very experienced when it comes to shipbuilding, when it comes to requirements of the Navy. As a former Secretary of the US Navy, the reason we have taken some time is exactly to address the particular issue that you've just pointed to. We didn't want to rush head over heels into making some judgments about a changed approach. We wanted to make sure that we had all the information, that all the information was properly considered, that we had considered all of the potential options on the way forward. We want this to be the final remediation. We want this to be the reform strategy that puts this project back on track for the long haul, to get it to a successful conclusion in the most cost-effective and efficient way possible.
So what is the difference between this remediation and ones done in the past?
Well, it is a more structural remediation. We've essentially very honestly looked at all of the problems without wanting to get into finger-pointing, without getting into any blame shifting. What we've said is, okay, well, what were all of the structural and systemic issues? How do we best, moving forward, get this back on track? And that is what we are putting forward as a way forward today.
You say changing the management, does that mean Rod Eckwood and Steve Little will be looking for new work by the end of the year?
Rod Eckwood and Steve Little.
The ASC and the Alliance.
Well, I'll speak for the ISC, and the Minister for Defence can talk for Defence, of course. Now, in relation to the ISC, I had another very good conversation with Bruce Carter, the chair of the ISC, last night about the findings in the Winter Review and the way forward, and the way the government proposes to go forward. And I have every confidence that Bruce Carter, as the chair of the board, and the board of the ISC will work collaboratively, constructively and positively with the government to ensure that this project is put back on track, that this project is delivered in the most cost-effective way possible. Now, obviously, matters related to management at the ISC is a matter for the ISC board.
I had some discussions with two of the contractors last night. They were official discussions. They were very formal discussions about the fact that this project needs to improve and that we are not going to tolerate the sort of outputs that have been put on the table from a productivity perspective particularly. That bears upon cost and schedule. Now, I can just tell you that the tone that I'm using now is a lot lighter than the tone I was using last night. There is no second chances in this. We are going to wade into this. Senator Cormann and I are going to wade into this. We demand commercial discipline in this project, and we're going to have it.
You've spoken sternly now about...
Minister, the National Audit Report pointed out that it was headed for a $300 million blowout, and I think you said it's 21 months behind schedule. Is there any way that time can be made up without compromising the integrity of the actual ships? And is that 300 million as good as gone? We've kissed that money goodbye?
Well, the position that, so you're quite right, the Auditor General pointed to a $300 million cost overrun at that point, and as I've said earlier, the position that we inherited was a deteriorating position, and the overall project is 21 months behind schedule. Obviously, the remedial action we are announcing today and that we're proposing to implement over the next couple of months is designed to make up as much time as possible, but I don't believe that we'll be able to make up all of the time. Obviously, I mean, the first ship was due for delivery in December 2014. Manifestly, we're not going to be able to reach that deadline. Is there going to be some exposure for the Commonwealth ultimately as a result of the state the project was in when we came into government? Yes, there will be. Can I put a precise number on that right now? No, I can't. But of course, the work that we will be doing with all of the government and commercial partners in this project over the next few weeks and months, we will seek to minimise whatever exposure there is for the government and for the taxpayers so that we can deliver what is a very important project in a national security context in the most cost-effective way possible.
Look, you've spoken sternly to the management. You've got presumably a report from Professor Winter. Are you able to release that report? And are you able to explain to us in a little more practical terms any of the measures that might actually be put in place to get this back on track?
Well, what we've done today is release a one-page summary of the report, and we've of course reflected the key findings and key recommendations in the body of our press release. Now, you'd appreciate that there are a number of very senior partners, both in the public sector and in the private sector, that are involved in this. There will be some complex negotiations taking place in the next few weeks, in the next couple of months. That is the reason why we've decided not to release the full report at this point in time, because we don't want to hinder the proper conduct of those negotiations and to achieve a successful conclusion of those negotiations by essentially creating too much disturbance, I guess, as those discussions take place. But at the right time, the report will be released.
And what does this mean for shipbuilding generally and for projects like the prospect of building submarines in Australia?
Well, in terms of shipbuilding generally in Australia, it's certainly very important that we get this project back on track, which is why the Defence Minister and I are announcing the measures that we're announcing today. David?
Well, Brendan, if we can't get this right, if we can't get this to an acceptable international benchmark standard, it doesn't say a lot about our future capacity. Now, we've got potentially another 8 future frigates that we would like to build in Australia. But let me say, I'm sending a very clear message out today. If we can't fix this, that is something that will be certainly in jeopardy, because I don't believe the government will support an enterprise that cannot deliver productively.
What is it? And submarines?
Well, submarines are a different kettle of fish altogether. They're a much more strategic, tactical artefact. I don't want to connect submarines to the air warfare destroyer at this stage. We are still on the path with respect to the 2 options that were left to us by the previous government. We're still working those through. But may I just underline the fact that this submarine issue is very, very complex.
And let me just, as the Shareholder Minister for the ASC, point out here that the ASC is performing very well when it comes to the submarine maintenance program. That is certainly the feedback that we've had from all of our relevant partners in the defence industry.
What does it say about the...
turn their ship around, so to speak. Does that make the fourth AWD more of a possibility?
Well, firstly, there will be some structural changes also in the governance arrangements of the programme, and I wouldn't want to make judgments on what ifs might happen before we actually can see that we get the runs on the boards with the reform strategy that we've outlined today. Obviously, we want to get into a position where the building of these sorts of ships in Australia can be performed competitively and cost effectively, but we wouldn't want to preempt, obviously where we will end up as a result of the decisions that we've announced today.
What does it say about the state of the ASC, though, that you need to insert an experienced shipbuilding management team into it, given it is a shipbuilding?
Well, what it says is that the ISC did not have the adequate capability to cost effectively manage a project of this size. And I mean, let's not kid ourselves. I mean, effectively, and I think this is a matter of public record, the ISC was quasi-learning on the job how to deliver a project of this sort of complexity, the IWD project, which is why the Winter Review made very clear that there were problems with the initial program plan, and there were problems in terms of inadequate government oversight. Essentially, at the outset, the risks with this sort of project, with this sort of program, were underestimated. The effectiveness of risk mitigation strategies was overestimated, and it has quite frankly taken too long for a government to take serious and structural and systemic remedial action. Now, the reason why we're announcing what we're doing here today is to get on top of that once and for all, and to give this program the best possible chance to be successful.
Sorry, just one other question. Are you able to say under the reallocation or indicate who is likely to lose work, or are you waiting until you're giving them the chance to improve their productivity?
Well, this goes to the discussions that we'll be having with all of the partners in this project over the next few weeks. You'll appreciate that there's some serious commercial sensitivities involved in all of this, and the reason we are engaging commercial advisors and legal advisors is to assist us in working through all of these issues, both from a governance point of view, from an integrity point of view, and also in terms of making sure that we make the best decisions ultimately for the sustainable delivery of this project.
But they're on notice that they have to demonstrate that they can improve productivity, or else?
Everyone involved in this project is on notice. Everyone involved in this project is on notice that unless we can get this back on track, unless we can demonstrate that we can build these sorts of ships competitively here in Australia, then we have problems for the shipbuilding industry for these sorts of ships here in Australia as a whole, and we don't want to get into that situation. We want the industry as a whole to have the best possible opportunity to be successful in building and delivering these sorts of ships in the future on time and on budget.
Minister, to be absolutely clear, this is a sort of final warning. If you don't lift your game, that's it. No shipbuilding in Australia.
This is a final opportunity to get this right. There's no two ways about it.
Can I just ask about GDP growth? 1.1% in the March quarter. Does that show that your claims of sort of a financial crisis in Australia are overblown? What impact do you think that'll have on unemployment? Well,
firstly, the Treasurer will be coming shortly to talk to you good people about the national accounts that were released earlier, so I will leave all of the commentary to my good friend and colleague, the Treasurer, Joe Hockey. Let me just make the more general point, though. We said in the lead up to the last election that we were focused on building a stronger, more prosperous economy, and that the policies that we took to the last election were designed to achieve that, and it's good to see that the early signs are there that is perhaps starting to have some effect, but I'll leave my friend the Treasurer to go into that in some more detail.
Back on the issue of the plane. Is it a good time to buy a new plane for the Prime Minister when so many people are being asked to do with less?
Well, it's not a question of being a good time. It's a question of what the country needs. Bear in mind these planes are used at election time by the opposition and occasionally by other people, the Governor-General, of course, visiting dignitaries, and so on. The fact is that this contract was renewed very quietly. It was a revelation to me as the Minister responsible, and I've said about the task putting a plan in place where we can cost effectively, and I expect to go very close to doing it for cheaper, replace the current fleet. Now, I think the public should, given our announcement today, take some comfort in we are about doing things cost effectively. It's not just about spending their money, it is about making things happen appropriately so that delays and systems and aircraft are reliable and work.
We'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much, guys.
Sorry, gentlemen.